Hello, everyone in the audience, and welcome. We at the UCI Alumni Association are thrilled to welcome you to this event where we're going to have an amazing program featuring a headlining speaker who we are honored to present to you today, and very thankful for her time. But welcome to Lunch with Eaters. First of all, Happy New Year, Happy 2021. This is the 15th installment of our Lunch with Eaters virtual event series. I'm Jeff Menhas. I am Executive Director for Alumni Relations at the UCI Alumni Association, and thrilled to open this event with everyone. And it looks like we have a very full and what I would expect will be an enthusiastic audience today in the crowd. So let me go over some of the logistics for the event today. First of all, this is a monthly virtual lunch and learn program built specifically for you, the UCI alumni and friends community. We started this at the beginning of the pandemic, and it has taken off as a very successful series of events. We have almost all of them archived. If you'd like to go back and reference past Lunch with Eaters, we have done a variety of different topics, but all featuring remarkable alumni. And we are most certainly continuing that tradition today. We have a few other resources I wanted to quickly mention before we get into the program. We have a resource called the Anteaters Go Virtual webpage. This is on the UCI alumni website, and it houses all of our virtual resources, and there are many. So if you are looking for our calendar of past recorded and upcoming live virtual events, that is there. We have resources for you to get more involved. If you'd like to engage with the university, if you'd like to engage as a mentor to UCI students who potentially need it now more than ever, or even younger alumni, we invite you to do that through the Anteater Network mentorship platform, which you can find on that Anteaters Go Virtual website. We also have other resources, including ways for you to advance your career, to find other resources, and even fun things like downloadable content for you to express your creative outlets during this very interesting year. So check out those resources. For the event today, participants, you are all in the audience, you're muted audibly to eliminate background noise for the program. However, we do not want you to stay quiet. We'd love for you to participate in today's event. In fact, we are going to have a Q&A section for the last 15 minutes of this event. So we encourage you throughout the hour, if you have questions for our featured speaker, to submit those in the Q&A function in the Zoom. We also have a chat, which we encourage you to use throughout. And I know many of you may know each other in the audience, so feel free to have some banter with yourselves and with our host. So we'll circle back to that. We're going to keep it to a tidy hour, so we'll be out by 1 o'clock, but I think this hour will fly by. So with that, I have the wonderful pleasure and honor of introducing our featured speaker. Erin Gruwell is a teacher, author, and founder of the Freedom Writers Foundation. By fostering an educational philosophy that values and promotes diversity, Erin transformed her students' lives. She encouraged them to rethink rigid beliefs about themselves and others, and ultimately rechart their futures. We're going to learn exactly how in today's program. I'd also be remiss if not mentioning that Erin has been a model alumna of UCI, has been a past member of the Alumni Association Board of Directors, is heavily involved still with the university, hiring interns from our School of Social Ecology field study program, hiring Anteaters as they graduate to work for the Freedom Writers Foundation, and connecting Anteaters around the world. Erin is a dear friend of mine, and I'm just so thrilled to have the chance to get to talk to her today. And with that, everyone in the audience, please join me in giving Erin Gruwell a great big virtual Anteater welcome. Welcome, Erin.
Thank you. As I just wrote in the chat room, I feel like today is going to be an Anteater family reunion, And for those of you that know me, those that have known me since I was 18 as a freshman attending UCI. I know there's some alumni like William who knows me when. And those of you that have known me throughout the years, the thing I miss most is the ability to be present, to give an anteater hug to each and every one of you. So we're going to do that virtually today. Um, but I'm so honored to spend this hour with you. And I think this has been a very surreal week. And so I'm feeling very tender about the state of the union. And why I wanted to state that first and foremost is what I learned at UCI was to be a critical thinker, to be a lifelong learner, and to always question authority. And we need to do just that right now. And so all of those lessons I learned as that young anteater living in the dorms have stayed with me, both personally and professionally. So I'm just really honored, Jeff, to be able to share this journey of how it started living in that Mesa Court dorm, how I learned amazing lessons by learning from Jill Halvack and those fine folks in SPOP, SPOP. I attended SPOP as a freshman. It was an incredible experience to learn from undergrads who had so much to share, and I had so much to learn. And I went on to become a coordinator for SPOP. And a lot of those lessons I learned, ironically, in the midst of my undergrad, I still use to this very day as a teacher, more so as a student. And so UCI has really been the backbone of everything that I have done. When I see my graduation year and realize that it is the 30th reunion, I'm on the committee for the 30th reunion. It will be virtual. I wonder how could 30 years have gone by this quickly? I want to pretend that I'm still an undergrad. I just spent 2 hours this morning with undergrads from UCI in a field study that we are running. So I know I'm not cool, and I try to be like, hanging out with the kids. I'm not. But I think back and I reflect, like, where did those 30 years go? But what was my constant, my North Star, was the ability to always go back. And so after I left, I continued to go back year after year, quarter after quarter, and so much so that UCI is really kind of baked in to everything that I do. As Jeff mentioned, I work beside and with and for UCI interns, UCI graduates, and we just elected a UCI alum to be the chair of my board, Mr. Bob Romney. So UCI is in the pulse of everything that I do. And I just think it's really important to always give back, especially now when people are hurting and need that touch and need that intimacy of being a part of something that is bigger than themselves.
Oh no, forgive me for interrupting, but you've touched on your time at UCI and how that brought you forward. Please continue. We're going to learn a lot about your how your approach to education evolved, and sounds like it's based a lot on your experience at UCI. But yeah, we'd love to learn about what drew you to become a teacher and more beyond.
To be honest, Jeff, I want to give a shout out to all of those fine folks who attended SWAP, worked in SWAP. What was so incredible about that program, and I remember our tagline when I was a coordinator, was celebrating diversity. And when I think of those images of the Capitol, that is not a celebration of diversity. That is not embracing everyone for who they are and where they come from. And so to be a teenager learning those lofty aspirations, to really be able to question the way things were and how the things should be, is probably the seeds that were planted for me as an undergrad. Ironically, when I started, I thought I was going to be a lawyer, and I know there's some lawyers like Mr. On this wonderful panel today, but I thought I was going to be a lawyer. I probably would have been an ACLU lawyer. I wanted to walk into a courtroom and stand in front of a judge and a jury. So the irony that I ended up standing in front of a chalkboard in front of students does not fall on deaf ears. But I think that the seeds were really planted as an undergrad, being exposed to so many cultures and creeds, and creating a family that was celebrated and embraced. They're not just buzzwords at UCI. You know, we live inclusivity. We celebrate people's authenticity. And I think when you see the best of humanity, you gravitate towards that. So I really want to give a tribute to SPOP and UCI for leading me, not into that courtroom, but into that classroom, and where I thought I could make the most difference for me.
Well, I share your sentiment as a fellow SPOP coordinator. Many of us here in the call, I'm sure, were involved in our own very important involvements as students at UCI that helped shape their lives. I think that's a common bond we have as anteaters. So thank you for sharing that, Erin. I'd like to ask, before we transition into your larger presentation, you have a unique approach to teaching, so much so that, as we can see on the poster behind you, you gained incredible support, fame, and beyond with a transition to the Freedom Writers movie on your book, and an Emmy documentary, which, as I understand, you attribute some success there to UCI as well. Would you mind talking about those as well?
Absolutely. This is my Zoom corner. So I'm very much a teacher in the midst of this pandemic persisting. And what has grown from this little corner, we had the ability to have Room 203 be a home to 150 kids known as the Freedom Writers for those 4 years. The Freedom Writers are still very much in my life. And so this corner has become Zoom 203 during the pandemic. And I think sometimes when I initially have that first Zoom with a group of students and they know I'm going to show up, I think they're disappointed because I think they think the gal behind me, Hillary Swank, is going to show up. And then I show up and they think, well, you're a lot older than that woman in the movie. So it is a blessing and a curse to have your story when you're an ordinary person reach such extraordinary heights. But what I'm most proud of is the documentary that we were able to create, to nurture, and then just this summer to win an Emmy. And I have to tell you, when you win an Emmy during a pandemic, it's not so sexy. There's no red carpet, there's no uncomfortable high heel shoes or fancy gowns. I was actually in my pajamas when we won the Emmy. But we would not have won an Emmy, to be really honest, if it wasn't for the fine folks at UCI. I believe that very night, Jeff, you were in the audience. Our current board chair, Bob Romney, invited a gaggle of his friends, friends that were alumni, folks who lived in the community, and also members of PBS. And when you are a public school purist, I'm so proud to have gone to public schools and teach at public schools. There's something very lofty about PBS. It's by and for and about the people. And even if you are poor and you don't have gadgets and you have a rabbit ear television, you still have access to quality television. So unbeknownst to me that very night, in the audience was the outgoing president and the incoming president of PBS SoCal. On that night, I think it was the spirit of the anteater, we filled the Crystal Cove in the Student Center. I think we broke some fire codes. No firemen came in and kicked us out of the joint, but we had people sitting in the aisles and standing room only. And in that very special room was many of the folks on this call today. And we were rapt and we were emotional. And then my amazing Freedom Writers stood on that stage and were profound and eloquent and so passionate about going to Washington, D.C. on 5/5/15, May 5th, 2015, to have a screening of that very documentary in the halls of Congress. And I get emotional because last night the Freedom Riders gathered and we watched the archival footage of that trip and how different it was for us as this colorful, eclectic group who had such reverence to our Capitol, to policies and procedures. And in that very crystal cove, they were moved. And the most moving of all was the outgoing president of PBS, Mel Rogers. And he wrote this exquisite letter to the executive producer of our film and said, I just want to be involved. And I don't think that would have happened if it wasn't for the ambiance of what was created in that space. We were different shapes and sizes and colors and hues, but we came together to celebrate humanity. And in that moment, we were all cheering, we were all celebrating, we were great empaths. And I think that is a tribute to PBS saying, we want to be the home of your film. And so I really do tribute Bob Romney, and I tribute UCI for allowing that to happen, because one of my fellow alumni, Maria Hall Brown, also helped be the bridge to make this become a reality.
Thank you for sharing that, Erin. And we're honored to be associated with your success. And we feel so grateful for you coming back to talk to our audience today. You mentioned you had help and connections along the way with fellow anteaters. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge we have a huge number of supporters of yours here because they are appreciative of you as well. I'd like to acknowledge President of the UCI Foundation, Julie Hill, in the audience, as well as trustees Carol Choi, Ivan Williams, welcome. Former UC Regent, William and former alumni board members Bob Romney, Kurt Busch, Greg Mickelson, Ramin Talesh, and other wonderful alumni who give back much like you do. So thank you all for joining us. I'm going to now ask for a poll, just a quick poll to pop up as we transition into the next portion of this event. How many of you have actually seen Erin's documentary or the film itself, Freedom Riders? Simple yes or no, but just so we know who in the audience is familiar with the film material. And it is an unbelievable accomplishment to be awarded an Emmy, to win an Emmy. So we're so appreciative of your accomplishments, Erin. About 2/3 of the audience have seen the documentary and or the film. So thank you for sharing that. We have a quick video to lay that we're going to roll momentarily to set the stage for the next portion of as we turn it over to Erin. Please join me in watching this quick video.
Being a Mexican American, growing up in Long Beach, and it was a lot of gang violence, Hispanics sticking with Hispanics, blacks with blacks, Asians with Asians. Especially around that time, there was a lot of problems with everyone against the Hispanics, all the gangs against the Hispanics. I wasn't a gang member, I used to be a tagger. I just will stick to my own. One of my favorite scenes is actually, there was an incident that happened in the classroom. There was a paper that was being passed around, and it turned out that that picture was making fun of Sherrod. I was like, wow, he's gonna come back with a kind of comeback or something, but he was actually pretty hurt.
What is that?
That's when Ms. G actually took the paper and saw it, and she started talking to us about racism and what the Nazis did in World War II.
They'd print pictures like this in the newspapers. Jewish people with big, long noses. Blacks with big, fat lips. They'd also publish scientific evidence that proved Jews and blacks were the lowest form of human species. In fact, life would be a whole lot better if they were all dead. That's how a Holocaust happens.
That's when the big question came up. That's when I raised my hand and I asked her, what is that? What is the Holocaust? She asked everyone.
Raise your hand if you know what the Holocaust is.
That scene right there, it took me back in time. And I was just remembering sitting there watching Ms. G after that incident happened in real life that I lived it. It changed my ways of thinking towards other races. It made me realize that we all get cut, we all bleed the same color. If that movie can help other kids, if it can make other teachers better, it makes me feel great. It's an honor being part of this. Honestly, I wouldn't change it for anything in this world.
Before I go backwards, I need to go forward. I want to paint a picture of Carlos in a 1965 mint condition Impala. And he wants to drive down Pacific Coast Highway, sitting next to Bob Romney and the fellow president of the alumni board, Bruce Hallett, and off they will go. And I think of that image of Carlos and Bob Romney and Bruce Hallett, two anteaters, with a boy who walked into my class all those years ago, who was broken and had been abandoned. And what was created in that classroom then, and that I'm trying to recreate now, is the ability for people to heal and to be whole. And the irony, Carlos just told us in that beautiful moment, we've been making these incredible videos for kids who, like Carlos, are broken, like Carlos, who don't feel seen and are heard. And the very first time I learned about Carlos in a very toxic teacher lounge where they didn't embrace thy neighbor. They weren't inclusive or accepting, all those great traits that I learned at UCI. I wanted education to be the bastion of meritocracy. And I heard negative things about this boy. Unbeknownst to me then, there was this school to prison pipeline where young men of color disproportionately line the halls of our juvenile halls and our prisons. And Carlos was in that pipeline. He'd been kicked out of every class and every school he ever attended, as so many of my other young boys who would have that name Freedom Rider bestowed on them. He was a tagger, and he used to write his name on every surface, every wall, locker, every corridor and overpass. And the name of choice was Idol. This is long before American Idol was a buzzword. And he said that tagging made him feel special, made him feel seen. So they were ready to pounce. You know, when Carlos takes out that marker or that spray can, we're going to kick him out. The first time Carlos raised his hand, I kind of winced. I thought he was actually going to flip me off. He did not. He had a legitimate question, and that question was really profound. He asked, Miss G, which I thought was kind of irreverent. I thought, he's not even trying to pronounce my last name right. But he said, Miss G, do you think I was an ugly baby? And when you are confronted with something like that, as a teacher, you have to think fast on your feet. And so my retort was no, there's no such thing as an ugly baby. And he said, well, I must have been, or why else would my mom have abandoned me when I was 6 months old? At that very moment, if I would have understood abandonment, I would have been able to predict that for the next 2 decades, that Carlos would be a part of my journey, that this beautiful boy would go from calling me Miss G to Mama G. And for any of my wonderful Latino colleagues and classmates, on November 10th, which is Mexican Mother's Day every year, I get a dozen red roses from Carlos for being his mama. And so I wanted to start there with that scene because when the pandemic hit, my fear then in March was what happens to all of those Carloses? There's going to be a digital divide, and there is. There is going to be people who are lost and are falling through the cracks, and there are. How do we help them? How do we see them? How do we hear them? And how do we help? And it has been daunting and it has been beautiful. And so the Freedom Writers and my fabulous team, we rallied and we thought, how can we look at the most important things when people are scared and anxious and they're having mental health moments? How do we promote mental health parity in a classroom via Zoom and get rid of stigmas and stereotypes and have candid conversations that are courageous? And so day by day, week by week, in this little Zoom 203 corner, we have done just that. We are working with the most vulnerable among us and allowing them to have a voice, to want to read, to want to write, and in doing so, to right a wrong. And I want to tell you about the first day with a group of kids that we hand selected that were kids who were part of that prison pipeline. They were kids between the age of 10 and 13, and they were the majority of which had already been kicked out of 3 different school units. So either a class or a district. They had social workers and somebody from the county probation office that was assigned to each and every one of these kids. So their teacher, who was a Freedom Writer teacher trained by myself and Freedom Writers, was the last resort. If you don't pass this course, we're going to send you to juvenile hall. We don't care if you're 10, 11, or 12 or 13. On our very first day, that video that we showed of Carlos, we were going to have these young people be exposed to literature, to moving moments in history, to allow them to think outside the box, to color outside the lines, and be a little messy, because life is messy. And so one of the little boys who showed up in our Zoom hadn't really quite figured out how to do the camera, and you could only see the top of his eyes. Some of his classmates didn't have proper computers. One of his classmates had to walk 3 miles to a Starbucks in the midst of this COVID crisis because he lived in a trailer and didn't have electricity. And off we went, trying to make things real, trying to make things relevant, trying to keep these kids to hold on. The idea that it gets better. And one of the questions we had as a writing reflection, we asked them to go into the chat room and to type away, was where they saw themselves in 10 years. The theme of that moment was resilience. We were going to show them examples of freedom writers who had fallen, but they fell forward. And when you become part of something that's bigger than yourself, there's someone there to catch you. So I was hoping I would probably get a couple corny responses. It's day one, it's Erin Gruwell, not Hillary. So I wasn't quite sure what I would get. But I was thinking in 10 years, they're going to be that rock star. They're going to be that athlete, that icon, that artist. And a little boy of 10 years old wrote in all caps in our chat room, DEAD, dead. And I was immobile. And I was immobile in the same way I was with Carlos all of those years ago about being that ugly baby. And in that moment, I thought, oh, hell no, I can't leave this program until this little boy has something to live for. Because when we get it right, education can and should, and it must equalize an unfair playing field. And here was this horrific example of a playing field that is not right, that is not just. Or a little boy who was part of a system being bounced around like a bag blowing in the wind at 10 years old, thought he would be dead by the time he was 20. And it made me feel desperate. And it has changed everything. And I think as an educator, I need to be reminded of how important school is, how important it is to empower talented teachers to be able to teach to a student and not to a test. I can't tell you how I celebrated last night when Betsy DeVos resigned. I wish she would have done it 4 years ago, but it's never too late. I say that because I'm a believer, like I said, of public education. UCI is an example of public education. And so what I had learned all those years ago with Carlos was to listen, to learn. Yes, I might walk into a classroom or sit in my Zoom corner as an educator, as a teacher, but the duality that I need is to also be a student, to embrace the Socratic method that I learned at UCI and make it student focused, student centered. And so in that moment, as the tears started to flow, I realized there's a story. What would make a 10-year-old feel that they were going to give up, that their life didn't matter? And I realized with Carlos and my Freedom Riders, and with Howard and those foster kids of today, that we all have stories. We all have stories to write. So one of the most amazing things that had happened all those years ago in my classroom, room 203, and what is happening today is the power of stories. Then Freedom Riders picked up a pen. Later on, they went to a computer screen and they began to write, anonymously so, their thoughts, their fears, their ambitions, and it became a book. And when we bound that book and sent it out into the world, it was as if we were sending a message in a bottle. We actually submitted the Freedom Riders Diary in its infancy stage to every single publishing house in New York. And every single one of them rejected us, every single one. And we kept trying. We resubmitted it. We did the writing process. I had some of the best English professors at UCI, one of which is Dean Lupton, who was my professor when I was an undergrad. And we rolled up our sleeves and we edited and wrote and rewrote and resubmitted it. And as it should be, the one house that published a book by a little girl in a tiny little attic published the Freedom Riders Diary. Because of Howard and that DEAD in a chat room, all these years later, that same publishing house is going to publish stories written by those kids. It's so exciting to be in a place right now of creativity, to give a young kid a voice, to be mentored by a freedom writer who made it to the other side, who did fall, and like I said, fell forward, and now they're a mentor. Now they are an author and an activist, and allowing someone like Howard to dare to dream and dream big, and to allow a child like that to become an author, to have credibility and be a storyteller, is going to be an amazing opportunity. So just as I did with the documentary, bringing it to UCI and showcasing it, the Freedom Riders and I made that documentary, and it took 2 decades. And I'm sure for 2 decades, I showed up at UCI and knocked on the door and said, can we show it to some students? I want to do the same with this new book. There will be young people who are declaring their stories, and I want Howard at 10 years old to stand in the Crystal Cove and look out at a sea of students and say, I'm good enough to come here. Yeah, I may be 11 now, but school is my ticket. It is my ability to start over, to follow in the footsteps of all of those leaders, all of those iconic figures, like that boy from Troy, our namesake, John Lewis. The Freedom Riders were blessed to take their name from John Lewis, and we learned about how that boy from Troy walked across that bridge in Selma on Bloody Sunday. how that boy from Troy stood beside Martin Luther King, looked out on the mall on that iconic I Have a Dream speech, and how that boy from Troy went on to become a congressional member from Georgia. I imagine what that boy from Troy would have thought on Wednesday when those hallowed halls were desecrated. And so to have that namesake of a freedom rider, RIDER, be our North Star, our compass, I would love for a little boy like Howard to stand on a stage at UCI and envision what education can do, how it allows us to transform, to be transparent, to be able to write a different chapter and write a different ending to a different story. And so right now is a really exciting moment. I have this wonderful board member, Bob Romney, who really poked and prodded and said, you need to pivot. You know, you've got this incredible story of the past. What about now? It's a new millennium. And when you think about whatever profession you are on in this chat room, whether you're a lawyer or whether you are a philanthropist, whether you are an educator, a parent, we all in our moments need to be able and flexible to change and reinvent and reimagine. And that is exactly what we are trying to do now, is to reimagine how it should be. How does every kid like Howard have a place at that table? How does every kid have an opportunity to be seen and to be heard, to have a do-over, to learn that even if you've done bad things, it doesn't mean you're a bad person. So I like to believe that my job as an educator has continued to evolve to different classrooms. I love that the new senator from Georgia was the reverend from the same church that Dr. Martin Luther King presided, Ebenezer Church. And now he's going to be in the halls of that Senate. And so Martin Luther King had to leave that very church to go out and be that disciple out in the world, telling stories, daring people to dream, to get into good trouble, as John Lewis has encouraged us to do. And so my classroom started out very humbly in Long Beach, room 203. It was messy and crazy and chaotic. And now it is larger. It is not just contained to 4 walls or simple assignments. I've been really blessed that the Freedom Writer story, once it was published, teachers found it, they discovered it, and we've been able to educate teachers all over the world. We run a teacher training program that UCI alumni and undergrads participate in, where we bring educators from all over the world to Long Beach to learn beside my original Freedom Writers. And that's been really difficult during the pandemic because we haven't been able to gather teachers. We've had to pivot and reimagine and to do it online. And I'm so excited. The last time we did one of those presentations online, there were educators from 47 countries who joined us. Countries I haven't even visited yet, languages I didn't even know were exposed to our story or had seen that movie. It was probably a bad dub version of the movie, but somehow, some way they discovered us. And what made me so proud is I was in the chat room with a lot of those teachers saying hello to teachers in Poland or Saudi Arabia, or there was a teacher from Uruguay who just never left. He just kept coming back minute after minute with questions and comments. What was so amazing is in this pivot, in this space, this virtual online space, we can reach more people. We can transcend barriers and boundaries. We can unite. The Freedom Writers and I had the ability to go to the Middle East. Carlos, the young man you saw earlier, I was able to take with me. And that's a daunting task to say to him, the US State Department is sending us to talk to Israelis and Palestinian teachers who were literally separated by a wall. But we're going to build a bridge. we're going to tear down those barriers and those boundaries. And so in this virtual space, as today, we can gather. Traditionally at 12 o'clock noon on a Friday, most of us would be at our jobs. And yet we could stop and we can pause and we can come together and create community and create family. And so that has been my task, along with my talented staff, is recreating. How do we reach that teacher who is struggling? There's a teacher in Nepal named Siddhartha who has attended every single one of our Freedom Writer forums. I don't know what time it is in Nepal each and every time he joins us, but the fact that he does is amazing. And so what I've been thrilled about is in this reinvention, I'm still learning. I feel like that kid who just graduated and was going to start my new job. And what I realized really early on is I knew enough to know that I didn't know enough. So I was constantly going back to Jill Helvick's, my spot director, and saying, what do I do? This is scary. And I have this insecurity and this imposter complex. And there's all these things I want to do in room 203. How do I do it? I still have those insecurities all these years later. And a lot of the folks that have joined us today are probably the people who get the midnight call for me in those moments of panic that, are we doing the right thing? Is this pivot making sense? Can we have those same kind of relationships in a Zoom that we do in person? Could things still be aspirational and emotional? And can people emote through a screen when they used to do it in person? And so this is a really interesting time for me to recreate everything that we are doing. But it's exciting, and we are able to really see the fruits of our labor. My hope is that what we create in terms of this new book, our curriculum, and with the other projects that we've had in play, that people will feel empowered. You know, we want to engage them, of course, we want to enlighten them, but most importantly, we want to empower them. And empowerment means standing up. Empowerment means speaking up, and empowerment means speaking out. We learned from incredible truth tellers who were survivors, one of which was a survivor of Auschwitz. She very candidly looked right at my students and said, "Evil prevails when good people do nothing." On a Wednesday, standing in our Capitol, I saw an image of somebody that had a shirt with the image of Auschwitz, and the words on that shirt said, "Auschwitz camp." It made a mockery. It made a mockery of my friend's time at Auschwitz, her death march. And she said to me then, and I'll say to you now, that evil prevails when good people do nothing. And I'd like to believe that now in the sacred space at UCI, we are all good people, but we have to stand up and speak out every moment of every day, not to be complicit, not to be silent, not to allow young kids named Howard at 10 years old to be a part of a system that is a school to prison pipeline, to say that you matter. You matter in our schools. You matter in our society. And someday I want to sit beside you at my job. And I think that's what education has really proved to me. So what I'd love to do now is make a transition to some of the questions that I know that you fabulous folks who are reading the book. There is a group of you at UCI right now who are reading the Freedom Writer's Diary, which is very exciting. And I know that many of you have questions. You don't know the names in the book because each and every story is written anonymously as a number. But I know that there was a lot of questions that were submitted to the UCI alumni before today. So I'd love to do in our last 15 minutes together is to have Jeff be able to pose some of those great questions that came from our alumni who are enjoying the words written by students that are hopefully universal and are not just contained to room 203 in Long Beach.
And Erin, everything you have said and everything you do is from your heart. And we greatly, I just will speak for myself. I greatly admire that. And we have so much to learn from you. And you're right, we have a lot of questions from fellow alumni and others in the Q&A. So I'll go through as many as I can. We have a lot of really good, deep questions. So this first group does come from the book club of the Anteaters in the Arts alumni chapter, led by President Ivan Williams. They have an Ant Reader book club, and their first selection was, as you said, the Freedom Writer's Diary, appropriately. So the first question, someone is curious if you had any plans during the time of how to keep track or keep in touch with your students. You know, retrospect is different than being in the moment. Some of them are now big, you know, have affected your foundation in good ways. But how did you react to seeing them realize potential along the way?
That's a great question. You know, I look at the amazing students that I'm working with right now from social college at UCI and the field study, and I think about the ability today from 10 to 11:45. We gathered these incredible undergrads. I hope some of them have joined us in this chat room. What a difference a child now has with technology. Everything is instantaneous. You could be in a Zoom. You have a gadget, a smartphone. When the Freedom Writers walked into my classroom, they had beepers for nefarious reasons. So when Carlos came in, he didn't even have a cell phone. No one had a cell phone in 1994. No one had an email in 1994. One of my students who has a similar background to little Howard, we had to fill out these identification cards. And tragically, Henry used to write where I stay at. Not where I live, not where I reside, but where I stay at. Because by the time Henry was 14, he'd already been to 42 foster homes. And everything he owned and everything he was in a brown paper bag. So I think about now how easy it is to stay connected. It was very difficult then. We did things the old-fashioned way. We did phone trees. We did snail mail. I think that's why I still love old-fashioned letters written that I receive in the mail. But when I started this journey, I had no idea that the Freedom Writers would be with us all these years later. Even the process of writing the 20th anniversary book was a beautiful godsend. And writing this new book it's going to be called Dear Freedom Writer. It's going to be incredible because of technology, because they are all over the place. But it was really difficult. I didn't realize the first quarter that I would stay with them, let alone for the next couple of decades. And so I learned a lot. I probably would have done a lot of things differently if I had a plan. A lot of it was divinity and serendipity, because I was making things up as I went. And I'm just thrilled that they stuck around. And when I say stuck around, I still see the Freedom Writers every day. Carlos, in the midst of a pandemic, just shows up. It's hard. He wants a hug, and I can't give him a hug, but Freedom Writers just show up. And last night we had this beautiful Zoom, and 30 of them showed up. And after 2 hours, I said, I got to go home. I got to eat dinner. And I checked out. I made somebody else the co-host of our Zoom, and they stayed on for another hour. So 3 hours of them just still being a family.
Thank you, Erin. We have a question which I am not going to ask you to answer, but Lorraine Navarro asks, how can we nominate you to serve as the next U.S. Secretary of Education?
Oh,
so that I'm going to take that, and I'm going to transition to a more current event related question from the Ant Reader Book Club. Are there a couple of key initiatives that you feel the American educational system needs to do right now to make an impact on current students who struggle with the same challenges as your students in the Freedom Writers Diary?
Absolutely. I think right now, with all that we watched in the summer, with George Floyd taking his last breath, Breonna Taylor being shot in her home, I learned in a New York Times cover story that the very last thing that Breonna Taylor did that evening was watch the Freedom Writers movie. And when I was sent the body cam footage of the police officers, you can actually see the Freedom Riders movie in her bedroom as they are going through her. It's surreal. So I think that what happened in the midst of a pandemic is people were out and standing up and speaking out and protesting. I love that iconic picture of John Lewis standing on Black Lives Matter Avenue in DC was actually one of the last photographs they took of him before he lost his battle to pancreatic cancer. So I think that we have to integrate into our classes the ability to know our history. Our history has not always been pleasant, but we can't deny it. We can't sugarcoat it. And I think that's really important, the history that we teach our kids. I love that we are having discussions about monuments and about movements, but I think kids need to learn that. I think that I didn't learn about our history until I was at UCI. I didn't learn them from a textbook. I didn't learn them from a teacher. And so I think we have to look at implicit bias. I think we have to look at what school is like when we have inclusion. I think it's really important for us to integrate with intentionality. I've traveled to all 50 states multiple times, and I know the effects of educational apartheid. I've seen it in most of our urban communities. And so I think that we've really got to allow people to talk about these moments. One of the things the Freedom Riders talked about last night in our Zoom was the irony. You know, the Freedom Riders are predominantly African American Latino, and every single one of them said, if one of us was to walk up those stairs at the Capitol, we would have been shackled, we would have been arrested, or we would be dead. And that's really important to talk about when people have biases and there's prejudice and there's intolerance. And so I think education has to allow those courageous conversations to happen post haste.
Yeah, thank you, Erin. And we have three amazing questions I really want to get to. We only have 5 minutes left, but the first question I'm going to say is from Will, the often mentioned and much respected. He's been thinking about you during the pandemic because we all can see you're such a people person, and the quarantine must have been very hard on you and your students. Could you share how you've been able to manage the current pandemic and perhaps provide us some advice on how you stay in touch and continue to advise students?
It is hard. And I just, on Wednesday, came out of a 2-week social isolation because one of the Freedom Riders has been living with me during the pandemic. And 3 days before Christmas, she contracted COVID. So I think everything that I have experienced, I tested negative, thank goodness. But everything that I experienced of being in isolation, to not be able to touch and to gather, is what we're all feeling. And I think it's made me more of an empath for those students who have anxiety, who feel isolated, who suffer with depression. It's made me aware and hyper-focused to understand not only PTSD, but complex PTSD. And I think that when we come out of this pandemic, we really have to take a look at the social emotional learning skills of students. And that's one of the things that my foundation is really focusing on now, is those social emotional skills that come from this COVID crisis.
Great transition, because one of the Ant Reader Book Club members asks, where does the Freedom Riders Foundation go in 2021? You just touched on it. Should we keep an eye out for more diaries from across America?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. You know, one of the things that we were able to do, and I'm so excited, is in this space to be creative. So we started a podcast. We started doing these forums where we would invite thought leaders and authors and activists and being more present. I used to travel every single week. Anyone that knows me knows my bag is always packed. I've been home since March 12th. And in being sedentary in one place, it allows me to travel through technology. Bob Romney used to make fun of me because I was one of the last people on the planet that had a BlackBerry. You know, he was the one that actually drove me to an Apple store and said, "You got to get an Apple. You got to trade in that BlackBerry that no longer works." But I think with technology, we can connect with people all over the planet, and we've done just that. It's been really exciting to see our similarities and not our differences.
Thank you, Erin. This may be our final question, but quite relevant and inspiring. Vanessa Bejarano asks, do you have any advice for a young girl like herself who may want to write a book about her life?
Oh my gosh. It's scary. I have to admit that in this process, I've been both the cheerleader and I've also been the author under a table in fetal position, sucking my thumb when I wrote my memoir. When you bare your soul so others can bear witness, you open yourself up for interpretation, for criticism. You know, our book, we used to facetiously call it the little book that could, like the train going down the track. I think I can, I think I can. And even though it was lauded and it was actually #1 on the New York Times bestselling list, that's one extreme. I've also gotten death threats. I had the Ku Klux Klan come after me. I've had white supremacists claim that our book is pornography. And just recently, a parent in Bakersfield, in the district where Kevin McCarthy lives, a teacher wrote this scathing letter to the newspaper saying that our book is softcore porn. I love that. I love that we have been banned and burned, because when you ban and burn a book, it makes kids want to read it that much more. So what I tell you, when you sit down with pen in hand or a keyboard, to write what needs to be written, stream of consciousness style, unabashedly, and just get it on paper, and then you can edit. Do it for you, not for an editor, not for a list, not to be banned or burned, but for you. That's where it becomes liberating and it's cathartic. And where I saw the healing happen, not only with the freedom writers, but where I saw the healing with myself. I know that we're just at the hour, but I have a little anecdote I have to share, Jeff. When I sat down to write my memoir, my strategy was to have my father be kind of like the antagonist, that he was going to ask the question as a naysayer, to poke holes and flaws in my process. And I would go to New York and meet with my editor, and then I would call my dad from Central Park and read him a passage, because he was very alive in the book. And then my father died suddenly, and I was crestfallen. I walked away from it. I did not know how to finish it because my father was an is, and I wasn't ready for him to be a was. And through writing, I kept him alive. Through writing, I got to heal. Through writing, he is still an is. He's not a was. So I think if you're going to write, you do it because you have to, with your hair on fire. It'll be an emotional toll, but when you finish and you walk away, it is for the world, and however the world accepts it, that's on them. It's not on you, but you did it. You made it to the finish line, and so please write what needs to be written.
Well, Erin, that's a phenomenal note to end on. Thank you for sharing so much of your personal story, and that of your students. Very, very touching, and so much that we can learn from all of your life story. Thank you for sharing that with the world, and specifically with us here in the UCI alumni community. So everyone in the audience, please join me in conveying our sincere thanks to Erin for your time, your energy, and your evergreen commitment to the UCI students and giving back to the community. So thank you so much, Erin. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
The good news is we have this event recorded. So we will have this in our archive. Feel free, I encourage you to share this with your anteater and non-anteater contacts, because this means more to the world than maybe we think. So please share this Erin's story. A couple other quick quick things. We will have a poll popping up on the screen, just a quick feedback for us on these events. So please take a minute to add or to answer that poll. Give us a little feedback. What other type of events might you be interested in attending? As you know, all of our events right now are virtual and as safe as we can make them. In the meantime, our next Lunch with Eaters, the 16th one, will be held on Friday, February 12th from 12 to 1 p.m. Mark your calendars. And if you do have any questions for us, or perhaps for Erin that we didn't get to, feel free to email us at alumni@uci.edu, and we'll do our best to address those as quickly as possible. Thank you, everyone, for attending so much. Thank you again to Erin Gruwell, the phenomenal model alumna. Erin, thanks for sharing your story. Everyone, have a wonderful rest of your day and a very, very happy weekend. Thank you, everyone.